There's a lot of kids out there who need your help, and a donation could potentially save them. Link to my fundraiser is in the description.
Dear my sweet dark knight, hello, it's me, the Riddler. Pleasure is all mine. You seem to have a knack for video games, so I would like to present a series of them for you to play and eventually review. Oh, do have fun. And for an extra bit of challenge, one of the secrets here is a clue for the next game. But where's the secret? You'll just have to find out.
Another Halloween, and I decided to review another game. What else is new? Well, the fact that I'm now Batman might be something. I may not have spoken about DC Comics franchises that often, but I am definitely a Batman fan. Not to an insane degree, as I'm not a database filled with pointless trivia about it, and there's still plenty of Batman media that I never saw, but between Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy, Tim Burton's great film, Matt Reeves' great film, the numerous crossovers with other Warner Brothers IPs over the years, and even the animated series, which I only started watching just recently, I've always enjoyed Batman in a lot of similar and a lot of different ways from other superheroes, and it's easy to see why he has remained an icon in all of media, even after all these years. And with all that popularity, he was bound to get a lot of video games. But the only Batman game that came out pre-2009 that I have any sort of knowledge on is Lego Batman, mostly because I was obsessed with Lego games back then, but even so, I found it to be really good. The rest, I'm drawing a blank on. Wait, there was a Batman kart racer on PS1? Hey Ben!
Yeah?
Think about an obscure kart racer for you!
Of course there is. I'll start looking for a copy online.
It's hard to say that there was a Batman game that truly knocked everyone's socks off at the time, especially given the state of licensed games back then, but that just made the shock and awe that today's game, Batman Arkham Asylum, left even more impactful. In a time where most licensed games only existed to capitalize on a brand, it was startling just how much effort that Rocksteady Studios, who only had one game that I've never heard of under their belt at the time, were willing to put into their own take on the iconic series. Oh yeah, disclosing this now, the Arkham series is not connected to any other Batman media, which I think would have been tempting to do considering Arkham Asylum came out a year after The Dark Knight, which was no slouch in terms of reception. The best familiarity with the series will get you is just a few background references to certain characters, namely in side quests. The Arkham game saga is its own beast, and it's all the better for it. As for my history with the game, I just saw a copy of the Xbox 360 version while roaming Target once, and chose to get it for my brother for his birthday, solely based on the fact that it was Batman, by the way. He loved it, and even let me try out some of the challenges, so I really got into this as well, and the rest is history. Now admittedly, whenever I've brought up this game, I've mostly been negative about its final boss, but I thought looking at the game in this format would be good for showing how much I enjoy it regardless. Besides, I think coming back to it after a while knowing what I know now might be refreshing. Though, despite having my Xbox copy right here, I'm actually going to be playing the PC version of the game, since it's widely more available at this point in time than the 360 and PS3 versions, and it might be a bit more ideal since it runs at 60 frames per second. So, the night is still young. Time to get into action! Hey, here's something that should be surprising. Batman managed to stop Joker and is on its way to put him behind bars. Big shock, I know. It seems like things are going as they usually do, as this is pretty late in Batman's career in this timeline, and they've gone through this quite a lot. But then Batman starts to feel uneasy, like Joker really wanted to get captured or something. And sure enough, Joker wanted to get captured as he breaks free and takes control of Arkham Asylum with ease, thanks to Harley Quinn granting him access from the inside. From there, rogues start running amok from Black Gate prisoners he had transferred to various other villains Batman has previously encountered, and the entire island is thrown into chaos with many people taken hostage, and Batman sets off to settle things down. But as it turns out, there's more to this madhouse, as Joker isn't just doing this for the laugh of it all. He's after what's known as the Titan formula, a serum made from the venom that Bane uses for his strength, that he commissioned from this scientist, Penelope Young, some time ago. Titan in general turns any human into this giant monster similar to Bane, and that alone makes it a serious problem, because no one wants anyone to have a mindless monster of that caliber by their side, let alone an entire army, though Dr. Young had a change of heart and tried to undo everything, while sending Joker back his money, and Joker being Joker essentially said he'll do it himself, kickstarting this plot. That's about it, and that's fine. This is really not a complex story, but for a game like this, I think it works to have the plot be pretty straightforward and have it work in the context of a game, yet utilize as much of the Batman mythos as possible. There's plenty of mystery in what exactly Joker did with Dr. Young prior, and what can be done to counter the threat of the Titan. I'm also fond of how many villains they managed to fit in without compromising coherency. I mean, sure, some contribute more than others, Scarecrow and Croc don't have as much to do story-wise comparatively, but everyone does have a reason to be there, and the game knows how to properly utilize them. Ivy especially I think was well handled, as she has a lot that could potentially counter Titan, yet knowing her, she's not 100% willing to cooperate. Heck, at one point she becomes as big of a deal as Joker himself. For being in its own continuity, and despite how long Batman's been around in the world of this game, the story really isn't that alienating to those who barely know who Batman is. It does give some clever hints to fill you in on what these characters have been through. There's a select number of chronicles about Amadeus Arkham you can collect that tell you about his descent into madness. The character bios menu does provide explanation as to who everyone is, and some context leading up to this point, with a large number of villains even getting some recorded interviews as collectibles. And full disclosure, the Riddler got the funniest ones.
I was determined to prove him wrong, so I entered a contest at school. A $20 prize to the kid who could figure out an almost impossible logic problem. I won, of course.
And that pleased your father?
Hardly. He was convinced I had cheated. He kept yelling, "You must have cheated! Admit it, you moron! You cheated!" I swore I didn't, and he hit me for lying.
I'm sorry to hear that, Edward.
Don't be. He was right.
I can see him making the goofiest of smiles behind that mic. As said earlier, this story really isn't that complicated, but it still does try to make it work as an adaptation of this franchise, and as a game in of itself, and in the end, I feel the efforts paid off. This was a time where companies truly wanted to step up their game in terms of realistic art styles, so it's no surprise that they want to take that direction for this game. But the way the game approached it mixes aspects you'd see in a live-action film with aspects more in place in a comic book, and it does a reasonably solid job. Arkham Asylum is perfect at invoking an atmosphere you'd associate with Batman, and the lighting to the way every building is presented really helps out. Everything is completely run down, every corridor and giant room feels really mysterious, like you'll never know what you'll find around the corner. And I do appreciate the little bit of visual storytelling with them, as the architecture gets destroyed over time. This also extends to Batman himself, as the Batsuit gets increasingly damaged over the course of the game. Like, it starts off fine, but by the end, it's breaking the laws of aerodynamics. Seriously, Batman is good at disobeying those. I also think he and a small number of other heroes do have solid models, despite how much muscle they gave Commissioner Gordon. But the real highlights of the character models are the villains. These are some really neat designs, especially Croc, because holy cow, look at this absolute unit! And Scarecrow, who actually does look like a scarecrow that mysteriously came to life. Very creepy, but it's exactly what I like about it. Though the models for the NPCs are definitely showing their age, and the fact that not many of them emote a lot is really distracting. In fact, now that I think about it, the mid-stage dialogue sequences that flip between characters look pretty off. I mean, this was the common practice in this generation, so I won't rag on it too much, but yeah, this was definitely part of the time. Also during one cutscene,
She's taken them to hide somewhere. I need to follow her and find out where she put them.
I didn't know we get to hear Batman think to himself. Wait, that's the only time this happens? Well, crap. But it's fine to appreciate the neat aspect of the visuals, because the game runs at 60 frames per second at all times on PC, with only a small handful of stutters, but never during vital moments, which is great. Audio, though, I think is really top-notch. I like how the soundtrack both sounds in place in a Batman form of media, and how it likes to amp things up whenever there's a fight or a stealth sequence going on. It does a great job getting you into the moment, and really making you want to witness Batman do his thing, and settling things down to let the atmosphere soak in. But there are two aspects I love that are part of this game: the sound effects and the voice acting. You really feel the impact of every hit you land on enemies, because they sound like they hurt, especially when you get critical strikes. Ooh, that hit the spot. This is something that's really best explained by the footage. Also, I love the slow-mo and the camera angles for when you finish off the last thug. Never gets old. Voice acting is also great, as everyone sounds like they're giving it their A game to give this premise some credibility. I mean, sure, you'll notice some VAs take on many different roles, like Tom Kane as Commissioner Gordon, Ward Quincy Sharp, and Amadeus Arkham. Stephen Bloom has quite a few NPCs, and Killer Croc, among a few others, but they're still working well with what they've got. But the highlights are easily Batman and Joker, as they had their voice actors from the animated series return. Kevin Conroy is honestly my ideal version of Batman. He has a perfect compromise between remarkably genuine and really imposing. Always a treat to watch. But likewise, Mark Hamill is my ideal version of Joker. He pretty much uses every second he's on screen to just go ham with this writing, and it's delightful. As it is to see how impressively he can pull off some lines in a sad or angry tone of voice. He just steals the show, plain and simple. And for one more note on that, this is also one of the very last times Arlene Sorkin reprised her role as Harley Quinn, as she would retire about 2 years later. I really like her direction with Harley here. She has this demeanor that sounds like an immature schoolgirl taunting someone, and yet she doesn't sacrifice too much of the crazy factor. Definitely fits her when she's in the role of an antagonist. While some parts haven't aged the greatest, the ones that did make the game still look nice today, which is definitely great for something based on a licensed property, let alone in 2009. So you're probably picking this game up just so you can play as Batman and do stuff you see him do elsewhere, and Arkham Asylum nails that goal for the material it has. Batman overall has a comfortable run speed, he can glide for however long you need him to, and he's got a grappling hook that he can use to pull himself to any point the game will allow you to. Most of the gadgets fit the tone as well, on top of just being fun to use. Batarangs are handy for getting in the edge in fights, explosive gel is fun to use on both enemies and destructible walls, the Batclaw and Ultra Batclaw are handy for what they have going for them, the line launcher is fun to use for long distance travel, and the cryptographic sequencer does fit Batman, but is only useful in accessing areas you couldn't otherwise. In fact, let's talk about that. Most of these are more so useful for exploration than combat, but that's cool because the design of Arkham Asylum and its many buildings is built with that in mind. The game is a lot less like an open world title, and more like a 3D Metroidvania. There's loads of narrow corridors as well as more open-ended areas, and certain events do change the structure of them over time, meaning some visits might go differently than others. For example, your initial visit to the intensive treatment does have you go through the normal security hallway, but over time, locked doors and gates will impede that progress, forcing you to take a different route. And heck, there's even one way that opens up after a different story event with Scarecrow, which adds a lot more to this place. Or for another example, there's around the Arkham Mansion that opens up by dropping a giant bell on a gate. Many of the buildings have this trait, and are better for it. Because of this structure, you won't be able to get everything on your first go, because you don't have all these gadgets by default, except Batarangs. But you gradually collect them as you go along the game, and the more you pick up, the more areas are open to you. I've come to really like this, as it does give each location more interesting set pieces to call their own, and sometimes the game will let you do some cool things when you first get a gadget. The explosive gel and the line launcher are really good examples of this. Each one of these gadgets do see a fair amount of use throughout the game, but I think they shine the most when you are going for the extra stuff, namely the trinkets that our good old friend the Riddler laid out for you. Riddler's stuff has seen a fair amount of divisiveness in the series, but honestly, I think he's just fine here. Because Arkham Asylum isn't that big, there's quite a lot of his trophies, riddles, and other goodies you'll find naturally, or instinctively if you have a knack for exploration, or that good of an eye. The harder ones aren't that cruelly hidden, aside from a small handful like the riddles in this room in the Botanical Gardens, and every area does have its own Riddler map that gives you an idea as to where they're hidden, without telling you what it is or how to get it, which I think does a good job in helping me expect what I should be looking for, with the log showing you which ones you already got, and which ones you need to get for good measure. I don't feel like they went overboard with how much there is to collect. They do give you rewards like new challenge mode maps, new character models that you can view in a gallery, and various character bios, and it's fun to get all these just to hear him react to you, ranging from boasting about his superiority, to generally getting scared or angry later on.
What? You're nearly done? You cheating, looking them up on the internet?
You cannot prove anything.
The only real downside with them is that if you are getting them all, the amount of backtracking you'll do adds up over time, especially with no fast travel. This isn't that much of a hassle if you're just going through the motions of the campaign, but otherwise, there's quite a few hallways you'll be sprinting down multiple times over. It also makes me dislike the rooms that don't let you use the grapple and force you to platform. These aren't bad in and of themselves, but with Batman not having a dedicated jump button, only jumping when you sprint off a ledge, and with occasional confusing navigation, especially in this room in the Botanical Garden, these feel like they are put in at the last minute. Not very fulfilling. But since this is a game about a superhero, you probably want them to be a superhero and beat up some bad guys, and Arkham Asylum really does a solid job with its combat for that. Granted, it primarily sticks to fist fighting, meaning gadgets are less handy here, but there's a lot of legitimate strategy and reaction time behind it all. Batman will usually find a thug to punch on his own, but he can also counter if you hit the corresponding button at the right time, and he can deliver instant takedowns to enemies who are lying down. The trick to the system is finding ways to keep your combo chain going. You have a combo counter that can easily lead to an increased chance of performing critical strikes that deal more damage, which is a great reward for doing well if you ask me, but it stays up for a very short amount of time, meaning you constantly have to perform successful moves to keep it. I found this a little tough to get used to, especially after playing a lot of character action games that keep this kind of thing up for longer, but it's something I think you'll get the hang of. Counters are handy in keeping it going, and the takedowns always feel great when you can get away with it, provided another enemy doesn't interrupt it, which they can if you do this improperly. Quick tip, I recommend tilting the control stick towards the enemy you want to focus on in order to keep things going. Normal punches don't do anything towards stun goons for a while, and it's likely you'll get swarmed, so by doing this you can instantly snap towards another one, which can be very helpful. Granted, as you go on, they'll introduce new enemies like knife wielders that you need to use a stun attack on first, and stun baton wielders that you need to jump over, but the priority remains the same. Adjust what's thrown at you and form your own solutions to them, and the combat will flow more naturally. It's satisfying to wipe out hordes this way, and I'm glad that they don't go overboard with how much stuff is thrown at you. Sadly, the bosses don't feel nearly as good. With Joker wanting an army of Bane-like monsters, most of the bosses in the game are against these monsters. Conceptually, that is pretty lame, but it gets worse when every single one of them is basically the same. Wait for them to charge, throw a battering, wait for them to crash, maybe get on their back to take down every other good involved, which is less exciting than it sounds, rinse and repeat. Even the settings and normal enemies don't change that much, and it's pretty sad when the game considers them to be the main bosses, but not as sad as it is to see Bane himself be a lesser version of them, and for the final boss to almost be a lesser version of that. Not going to show that one to avoid spoilers, but for those familiar with my work, you know who I'm talking about. Really, the only boss I consider to be decent is Poison Ivy. In her fight, she's in control of this massive flower constantly sprouting roots everywhere, and firing these spheres at you, but it makes decently viable use of batterings for damage, and at some points, the game allows you to use explosive gel. This boss is a little repetitive, but it's much more in line with what I expected, and it was pretty fun. I don't really count Croc and Scarecrow as bosses, because you don't really fight them. They primarily have levels that test stealth and platforming, not combat. However, I will say that these are still fun sections regardless. This part of the game where you need to collect spores for a Titan antidote is really tense because the threat of Croc is always looming over you, and getting caught results in death. As you get more spores, he likes to mess with you, appearing in unconventional locations, and results in destroying platforms later on. I had butterflies in my stomach when I was doing this part, and hearing him burst up and come for me was really intimidating. P.S. Quick batterings don't work on him. I tried. As for Scarecrow, 3 times in the game he pops up and puts you into various nightmare sequences, which usually start off with a tragic event, those being an illusion of a dead Commissioner Gordon that never happened in the first, Batman's dead parents in the second, and... you know what? No, I'm not going to say the third one. That one is best kept a secret, but it's always followed by a sequence where you need to avoid Scarecrow's gaze or face a grueling end. These are not just visually stimulating and incredibly nerve-wracking, but they also work as puzzles, trying to find where to go, when to stop, and when to use your gadgets to manipulate the environment, and sometimes even Scarecrow himself. Definitely some of the most fun parts of the game. Not every encounter with the Croc is like these though, and now I get to talk about the stealth sequences. Oh boy! At quite a few intervals, you'll come across a massive room with a bunch of goons with guns walking about. Guns can naturally mow you down on their own, so now it's time to avoid contact with them and take them out from the shadows. These are my favorite parts because there's tons of useful ways you can use your gadgets to stun or outright take out a guard, and depending on the room, you can use the environment to get creative with your takedowns. The crashing through the roof and inverted takedowns easily scream Batman to me the most, and as you go on, you'll easily get more moves that can add more flair to these sections and encourage experimentation. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention this. Completing combat, stealth, and Riddler challenges will net you experience that you can use to gain new moves and improve the quality of certain tools, like making batarangs hit harder, improving the range of the cryptographic sequencer, that kind of thing. This isn't an RPG per se, but the system is a good way of opening up more ways to approach everything, which is great. Gotta say, I think some of the artwork for them is pretty funny. This upgrade system is largely why I recommend going for as much Riddler stuff as you can, because it gives you some more experience, making it easier to get some upgrades. So find as many trophies and smash as many Joker teeth as you can. Surprisingly, they also decided to include some of Batman's roots in detective work here, as there's plenty of times when he'll need to find a clue in an enclosed space in order to track down someone, but it does all that and more with detective mode. It's basically a filter that can be used on these missions and for fighting enemies and collectibles at a distance. I do really like it, as it's very useful for keeping track of everyone during stealth sections, which is harder to do with it off, and using it to solve riddles feels great. However, I do think they made it a little too useful. I don't really feel incentivized to not use it during stealth sections, since it does nothing but help you, and you can use it to scope out the next room if there's something already ahead. I find it really hard not to use it, so you could theoretically have it on during the whole time and get a similar result. Minus the game's graphics, which is definitely an issue. What I describe is what the game has to offer in the campaign, but getting enough Riddler stuff will let you have access to more maps in challenge mode. The combo ones test you in seeing how high of a score you can get, with single, double, and triple bat ranks, and the stealth ones rank you based on what 3 specific objectives you did. I feel like these highlight the amount of options you have to stealthily take down guards, and I enjoy using unorthodox ways I could do these. It's also in this mode where you get to play as the Joker, if you're playing the game on Mac or PS3 or any 8th generation console via the Return to Arkham version, or you mod the PC version, like I did. Joker does have a fair share of differences from Batman, as his detective mode is less reliable overall, since you can't move while using it. He has a gun and teeth with dynamite that can deal serious damage, and he's considerably less durable, meaning you go down much more easily, but controlling the character in this setting is undoubtedly charming, and it's fun seeing him take down these guards and even Commissioner Gordon in the most cartoonish way possible. There's a fair bit to do in Arkham Asylum, but it doesn't really feel like it's asking for much overall. I collected about 13 hours when I was done with my final recording covering the Joker challenge missions, and I feel like the game did just the right amount to make me feel fully satisfied. I am so happy that even after more than a decade, Batman Arkham Asylum is still as enjoyable and admirable as it was back when it first came out. Sure, it has its shortcomings, but with how the rest of the game would truly be, with the fun combat, satisfying stealth, well thought out design and size of the island itself, and all the little touches sprinkled in here and there, those are pretty negligible in the long run. And because I have a bit of history with it, coming back for a new playthrough left me feeling both impressed and a bit nostalgic. I can easily recommend this for anyone who likes Batman or just wants a fun game to play overall. From what I can gather, every version of the game is perfectly fine as they are, including the Return to Arkham version, despite the number of graphical downgrades with the character models and the frame rate locked at 30. So I think it's totally fine to play any version, though my recommendation is still the PC one. The frame rate does it justice. But no matter what, this is one night I think you should absolutely witness for yourself.
I'm Light Ripper and... wait, didn't Riddler say something about a clue to the next game? Where could that be?